Today on Sounding Off, we have one of the greatest drummers of all time. Mr. Dennis Chambers is with us. It's coming up next. This week, our special guest is legendary drummer Dennis Chambers, who's one of the greatest drummers of all time, one of my personal favorite drummers. He's played with everybody from John Scofield to John McLaughlin to P-Funk to Brecker Brothers to Steely Dan to John Scofield to Greg Howe, Mike Stern. And we were just talking before we started, and we were talking about your drum sound on Blue Matter and Loud Jazz, the John Scofield records. And I said to you, that's crazy, right? So I said, those are the best rock drum sounds that happened in the 80s. Super punchy kick drum, amazing snare and tom sounds. I mean, the snare sound, when people were doing these ridiculous samples that were 20 milliseconds behind with all the reverb, all the rock bands and everything, you had the greatest rock drum sound, super powerful. And you were telling me about this Slingerland kit. Can you tell me a little about the kit, what kind of shells it was, and why that drum kit sounded so good?
Well, the history on that kit was, going back to Tony Williams. I was supposed to I met Tony a long time ago, and I talked him into getting me a Tony Williams Gretsch kit. And, a lot of time went by. Every time I would call Tony, I'm like, Tony, so what's the deal with the kit? And he kept putting me off, and I got tired of waiting. I go down to a music store, Chuck Levin's, in Wheaton, Maryland. I go down to purchase a kit. They wouldn't sell me the kit there, and then I had to go over to Veneman's music store to get the Gretsch kit. Would try to buy a Gretsch kit. Kind of find out they don't sell Gretsch drums there. And I went. What I went with the next thing I liked, which was a Slingland kit. So I brought a Slingland kit identical to Tony Williams' drum kit. And that was the kit I used on Blue Matter and Loud Jazz. Now, the reason why that kit sounded so great, it was all maple shells. And it was all, the whole kit was like standard sizes. It's like, instead of like the 14 by, I'm sorry, like a 22 by 16, which is what they use now. It was all it was like a 22 by 14s, because back in the days, all the bass drums were shallow. They were like 14s in depth, not 16s and 18s in depth. And I still prefer that size bass drum instead of getting like a 16 or an 18 by 20 or 22.
And why is that? Is it that you can move the air through it faster and it's punchier?
Yeah, the sound is faster. The air is faster. Definitely faster.
So more articulation when you're doing especially fast kick moves. Yeah. But the snare on that kit, what was that snare? Was it a maple snare as well?
The whole kit was maple, and it was nothing custom, or anything special about it. It was just that's the way they made drums back then. Now, they go through all these tricks and all this, but you got to add, it need this and it needs that. And then they're still trying to copy, like the old Gretsch sound. Well, the old Gretsch sound, when you pull off the heads, the shells are like what 3, 4, 5, 6 ply. And now they, you look at some of these drums, like some of the shells, like I got a snare drum, it's like 21 ply. And it's like, first of all, the thing is so heavy, and it still won't beat anything like especially it won't beat anything like a Ludwig snare drum. And Ludwig snare drums are like, like the little small, little thin little plies of maple shells.
Yeah.
So, and I'm a big believer in sound. I don't, really get into like, you got to use all these different types of woods to get a certain sound out of the thing. The simpler way possible for me is the best way to go for me. Now, I endorse Pearl drums, and some of my drum kits like have like like so many ply of maples with some gumwood and also mahogany.
They'll mix them between
For
the different drums, though, right? Some of them will be.
yeah. Like different sizes, you may require different types of wood to use, and it all depends on what kind of sound you're trying to get. But for me, sound has always been really, it's just been really important for me. And it kind of amazes me, like some people that they really don't know how to tune their drums.
It's unbelievable.
And like for instance, like the younger kids today, they think the first thing they tell you, or the first thing they ask me, like, why do you use a 13? Like, what do you mean? I can't. If I have a 14 and a 16-inch floor tom, I have to use a 13-inch tom. But they use a 10, 12, 10, 12, 14 floor,
Yeah.
and a 16. So the 13 is missing. So then you got this small little sound up top, and then that one thing is missing, that 13 down to 14, which is a whole lot bigger sound.
Yeah.
And then they wonder why my drums sound the way they do. And when I tell them about the 13, they were like, "Well, the 13 is hard to tune." Well, it's no hard to tune than a 14-inch floor tom or a 12-inch drum. Take yourself and take the time, take a drum key and learn how to tune it. Then you know how to tune it.
Let me ask you
Just
this.
like you learn how to tune the 12, and you learn how to tune the 16 or the 14 or the 18-inch floor tom.
When you're going to do a session, how often you change your heads, for example? Will you change your heads before a session, or will you leave your heads on a long time?
I leave them on for a long time because I hit hard sometimes at all,
Yep.
but I don't hit hard to dent heads or to kill the heads.
Back in the 80s, for example, versus now, would you use, I mean, Tony back then used, I believe he was using controlled sound tom
Black
heads,
dots.
right?
He was using black dots on
Black
top
dots,
and bottom.
yeah.
Yeah.
But you didn't use that back then, though.
Not on recordings. Like some of my Gretsch kits had them. Just to see what they were about.
Yeah.
See what they sounded like on my drums, because I love the way Tony's drums sound. But the crazy thing was, I had to sound check his drums one time, and he sounded really crazy to me when I got behind him and play him. And when he got behind to play him later, it sounded like the drums. It sounded like Tony's drums. But when I got behind and played the things, it sounded weird to me.
It's all in the player, right?
Yeah. It all depends on on the player and how he hits.
Let me ask you this about Tony Williams.
A real big influence on my playing, and he was also a big influence on a lot of other people's playing, whether they really admit it or not. Like I knew Billy Cobham loved him. All the drummers loved him. I mean, Terry Bozzio loved him. Vinny Colaiuta loves him. All the players really love Tony. I mean, because he puts he put the drums right out in front, and what he said with that instrument, like nobody else said it, before he did it, like with that, playing fusion music and also playing jazz. He had a different way of swinging the music, that made him stuck out, further than anybody else. For him coming out of Alan Dawson and all that stuff, because I remember when I first saw Billy Cobham play, it was in the 60s, and he was playing with Horace Silver, playing jazz. I forgot exactly what year that was. I think it was 60. I think it was 67 or 68 or something like that. Maybe 66. I can't remember. No, it was 67, 68. And it was hard for me to believe that was the same guy who played with the Mahavishnu when I saw that. I was like, there's no way that can't be the same guy. No way. Sure enough, it was.
Okay, can you talk about some other, like, for example, Elvin Jones? Was he a big influence on you?
Yeah, my let me just tell you all my influences. My influences: Elvin Jones, Roy Haynes, Tony Williams, Lenny White, Billy Cobham, Uh, Buddy Rich, of course, Louis Belson, um, Steve Gadd. If I didn't mention him, Steve Gadd, um, David Garbaldi, Clyde Stubblefield, Zigaboo Monalise, Melvin Parker,
Mm-hmm.
and up to like now the later drummers, or the drummers of this time and or this era. Again, Vinny Colaiuta, Mark Mundazier, Gary Husband,
Yeah.
who plays with Holsworth from time
Yeah.
to time.
Yep.
And he also plays with John McLaughlin, but he's playing keyboards. Sometimes he plays little drums. That guy's really amazing. And then there's Spud, like the younger drummers, like Tony Royster is another favorite of
Yeah.
mine, because I mean the guy, he learned what it was all about, and he knows how to keep a gig, and he's got chops up the yin yang. Thomas Bridget is another one. Thomas is really amazing, really amazing drummer. And he knows a lot about the instrument too.
How would you say that things like YouTube, for example, and kids being able to watch people anytime and learn things and have people teach them was different than from when you grew up and you learned off records by ear? How do you think that changes, that?
Well, it kind of ruined some people in a way. I mean, because like back when I first learned how to play drums, it was almost blasphemous to try to play like somebody else. It was blasphemous, like, and that's why when you look back on the 60s and 70s and some parts of the 80s, the early part of the 80s, but the 70s and the 60s, 60s and 70s. I mean, just think about all the musicians that came out of that era. I mean, just take Motown, just one company,
Right.
and think about all the groups that came out of that, and it was only one band who played on all of that. And then you talk about like the Stax recordings, all the people that was involved in that, and one group came, that played through all of that stuff. You know, just those two, just those two companies, and my God, we're talking about like, I mean, like, I mean, thousands of recordings and things. And then you also had, like you had all these groups were really experimenting. Like, Hendrix was experimenting with like a jazz drummer and a bass player that played guitar really.
Right.
And then you had Cream, who Ginger Baker was he loved jazz
Yeah, he was a jazz
drumming.
drummer. Right.
And he is a jazz drummer.
Yeah.
And then you got Jack Bruce, who was a jazz bassist, But then they teamed up with a blues guitar player and became one of the greatest rock groups of our time.
Yeah.
And things like that, you wouldn't find things like that
Never.
now, because nobody really take chances on music. And there's a whole reason, a whole history why that happens these days. I mean, because first of all, you had a lot of major record companies, Atlantic and Warner Brothers and Epic Records and Olympic Records and all kind of companies, like they all had jazz departments.
Yes.
And like I think I forgot, this is like every 10 to 15 years they up the record sales, what qualify gold and silver and platinum records. And like, so back I think in the 60s, it was 60s and 70s, I think it's like 500,000, no, five if I remember correctly, I think it was 5,000 copies was gold. And then they moved it up to like up, and then all of a sudden like 500,000 now is gold.
Yeah. They're gonna have to start
So
moving it
forth, so
back
forth.
down.
Yeah. So what happened was, like now, a lot of major companies, they lost their jazz departments. And the crazy thing is, what people don't realize or don't know, the jazz department was like a tax write-off, the pop department. But the trade-off was all the rock and all the musicians that flowed into those different eras, genres of what they were into, they were basically learning how to play the instrument because of the jazz guys.
Yeah.
They learned how, they learned how to write compositions, far as like theory and all that kind of stuff. Because when you basically play rock music, it's not that many deep chord structures, except for like the guys. I mean, and that's why groups like Led Zeppelin and Cream, um, did what they did because they had jazz guys in the groups.
Right.
And the guitarist Jimmy Page, as I learned later by working with John McLaughlin. John McLaughlin was one of Jimmy Page's teachers, and that was the whole idea, or where he got the whole idea of playing double neck guitar.
Wow. Did not know that.
We were standing. I was like the first time rehearsing with John, or that week of rehearsing with John in London. We were next door to Jimmy Page, and I didn't even know. So John sends me out in the middle of the building to get some tea, take a break for a minute while he was showing Joey some parts for this song we had to learn. So I'm in the tea area drinking tea, and I hear this guy freaking out, talking about his teachers next door and this, that, blah, 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 blah. And I look up, and I didn't even connect the dots. I'm looking at the guy. I can see his face, but it didn't connect. So I'm reading on. The guy's wife comes in, and I forgot her name, and he says, blah, 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 my old teacher's next door to me, and blah, 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 blah. And she says, well, so what? You're Jimmy Page. So what? Like, you don't understand. He's one of the reasons why I play guitar.
Wow.
And, the reason why I play guitar the way I do is because of this guy. And I looked at him again and didn't connect, because when I first looked up at him, he had all his hair combed back into a bun or ponytail, like a bun.
Yeah.
And I never saw him like that before.
Right.
Because normally when you see Jimmy Page, his hair's all in his face and got the hat on and the whole nine. And I'm looking at him like, oh yeah, that is Jimmy. So I walked over to him and introduced myself, and said I couldn't help but overhearing that John McLaughlin was your teacher. He says, yeah. And I'm like, well, I'm playing with John. I'm working with John. Blah 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 blah. Would you like to see him? And he says, yes, I would love to see him. So I walked in, back into the rehearsal room, and I said to John, what did I say? I said something to the fact that like I understand that you taught Jimmy Page how to play guitar, or you were one of his teachers. And he says, yeah, what of it? I'm like, well, he's outside the door. He's looking for you. He wants to see you. And he made some comment, which I won't repeat. But I remember one thing he said, he still owes me money. That's what he said, one of the things, amongst a few other things. And I'm like, yeah, well, whatever. He's outside the door. And John made his way out there, and when John opened the door, Jimmy just jumped at him and just gave him a big hug. And you could see Jimmy was just like just really happy to see him and talking to him, and John, had that surprised look on his face, because I guess he didn't expect that kind of reaction from Jimmy. And John, started smiling, and they just looking at each other, and looked like Jimmy, his eyes got watered a little bit, because he was just really happy to see him, and they started talking and going back and forth and da 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 da. Jimmy takes me over to his room. Now imagine, like, you walk into a room, and I kid you not, from the door where I came in, all the way down the wall, up to the stage, all the way across the stage, to that wall, back down to the door where I came in, on that wall, on the other side, opposite sides, all cabinets, all amps.
Wow.
No drums, just all guitar cabinets. and some of the stencils, it still had the stencils on it, the Yardbirds,
Wow.
Led Zeppelin, all the groups that he worked with. It still had the names on some of those cabinets that he used back in those days. So I'm asking him, like, and his double neck guitar and a Les Paul guitar sitting like right in the middle of all that stuff on stage. And I'm asking him, like, what's going on here? He goes, like, yeah, I'm going out with Robert Plant, for a tour, and I just want to see what really worked, which of my cabinets worked, and what stuff needed to be worked on. And I was like, well, man, can I go and take a look at your guitar? I said, sure, mate. And so I go up, and he said, well, pick it up. So I'm like, no, I don't want to pick it up.
That's
I
like
just
the
want to look at.
guitar.
No, pick it up. So I give you a little history about that guitar. So I picked up his double neck guitar, and that's when he told me, like he got the whole idea of playing double neck from John, and
Wow.
and he was showing me this bridge that wasn't out yet, where it's like no matter what he did to the whammy bar, or it never ever goes out of tune. He just hits a button on the bridge, and the thing just automatically just tune itself. Now this was like 1990. I think it was 1995, and it wasn't. I think they have things out now that can do it, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure. But he had it out. I mean, he was one of the first, or the first. And now the crazy thing was, Steve Howe, the guitar player for Yes,
Yeah.
is downstairs. He had a guitar studio, a guitar store downstairs in that building. He finds out that John is in the building. He comes up.
Oh.
So now I'm surrounded with all these like legendary guitarists, and I'm standing there just smiling, looking around, and like, after it was all said and done, I was like, man, I should have taken a picture, But the only picture I got, some pictures of me holding that guitar, and you can see the amp wall of Jimmy Page. Yeah, we have 2 gigs in May. That's with the original band.
Okay.
With Gary Granger, Jim Beard, and John and myself. And then I have a month, I think, in July. The whole month of July, I'll be out with him with his Uber band.
Okay.
And that's going to be in Europe.
When you and Gary you guys are from Baltimore and played together before, played with John on those records. How did John know you guys? You guys played in bands in Baltimore before that, right? You and Gary before you guys played with John?
Yeah, we didn't play in bands. We always played at jam sessions.
Okay.
I think John Scofield's band was the first band we actually played in, but we've done so many jam sessions together. It was like we know how we played, But how that came about was it all started for Gary. There was a keyboard player by the name of Mark Cohen. He and Gary were good friends. Cohen was playing with Scofield, drug Gary in the whole thing. They're just coming back from Japan. They had a night off in San Francisco. At that time, I was playing with Special Effects, and we were playing at a place called the. I can't remember the name of that place. I can't remember the name of the place, but I remember it was on Grand Street, I believe, in San Francisco, right downtown. But anyway, we're staying at the same hotel. I see Gary, ran into Gary downstairs at the front desk. Told him what I was doing. He told me what he was doing. Gary drugged Scofield over to see me play with Special Effects. After the show, John approached me and asked if I would play on his record. So he basically hired me to play on the record. And as far as I knew, I'm playing on this record and had no idea that I was in the band already.
Okay. So
after in the middle of the recording, I think it was he was talking, to me about the band, and it's good to have me in the band, or something like that. I remember, and that's when I learned I was the drummer for the band. we had like a week of rehearsals, or like less than a week of rehearsals, and then we went out and played a little short rehearsal tour for the record. And I remember we played at Blues Alley here in DC. And at that time, I don't think we had a keyboard player yet. It was supposed to have been Kenny Kirkland, as far as I remember. And Kenny never showed up for the rehearsals. And he wanted the gig because he kept saying, "Oh, I'll come, I'll come," and he still didn't show up. So by the time we went out and did the first dates, or the first, yeah, we had the first tour, John hired Mitch Foreman. Nah, yeah, he played on Blue Matter. So he hired him, and that's the reason why he hired him, because he did the tour. But it was supposed to have been Kenny Kirkland. And then they added George Duke, and that was my connection with George, because George was a big fan of P-Funk at the time, Parliament Funkadelic.
Yeah.
And that's how I was able to work with him.
I want to ask you about your playing and your feel and your groove. I want to play something for you, see if you can hear this. This is you playing, okay? This is from a Mike Stern gig. Let's see if you can hear this. And you're taking a solo on this, all right? So this is just over a vamp, but I want to ask you what you're doing on here, and if you can talk about it. So tell me if you can hear this.
Yeah.
Okay, so and you start kind of regrouping the time or displacing the beat. You're doing this just by feel, right? You're not even thinking about this, or are you thinking about it?
No, it's all feel. I mean, because when you get to a point where you play music so much, everything is a feel at that point.
Yeah.
You don't have to sit there and count and I mean, because I know the solo is in 4.
Yep.
Right? And I know where the pulse is because I can hear that 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, count bars. But that don't necessarily mean that I have to play, in 4, or it don't necessarily mean that I have to play in the pulse, same pulse.
Would you call that a metric modulation, or what would you call that?
That's exactly what it is.
Are you subdividing, or you're feeling let's say a quarter note triplet, that you're playing a straight 4 beat on that with the underlying pulse going on?
With that's what that is. But see, sometimes I'll use like 3/16ths, or move a 3/16th of a beat over, or sometimes I'll play if I mean, so many different ways of doing it. Like sometimes I'll sit there, and if I feel the pulse is like 1, 2, 3, 4, and the snare drum's supposed to be in 2 and 4, I'll put the snare drum on 1 and 3, which now I'm on the other side of the beat.
Sure.
And it all depends on where I place that hi-hat too. Sometimes I'll put the if I'm on 1 and 3, which put the whole thing, flip it, but the hi-hat is on the 1E and 1E and 2E. Sometimes I put the hi-hat on the and of things, or the of things, which kind of make people kind of like really think about what's going on there, and then they have to like stomp time, right, if they're not used to it. And it took. I mean, everybody who I play with when I do drum solos, they can't look at me. They gotta like really concentrate on the time until they get used
Well,
to
Mike
it.
Stern is laughing while you're playing.
Well, yeah, he's laughing. He's probably laughing at
He's laughing at
that
what you're
time.
playing, how amazing it is. I know that, but he's also laughing like, oh, I got to hang on here.
Yeah, because there are other times where he's, it all depends how deep that wormhole goes. Sometimes I'll come up with something really crazy. He's laughing at first, and then all of a sudden that laugh turned into a frown, and then you can see him doing this, and he put his hands up for a second, and you can see him stomping time.
He's
But it all depends
he's
on how
stomping time in
deep
that.
it goes. Huh?
He is stomping time in that. It's funny. If you're going to go into something like that, like you actually leading off your solo, right? You go right into it. Do you tend to, if you're going to go into some type of metric modulation, do you like to lead into it before a downbeat? Do you like to bring it in early when you're going to start? Does it matter?
It don't matter. I mean, it all depends on how I feel at that moment. Sometimes I'll lead into it. Sometimes I'll set it up and I'll play a group of like whatever rhythms I'm thinking about just to see if that fits. Like for instance, I set that up. You hear da 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 da, and think about how many beats that went by.
Right.
And also like if I'm thinking of like 16th notes or 30-second notes, how what that feel like also while I'm doing this. And then after that, when I get the combination, I just go.
Every time I hear you do things like that, it always has such a groove to it. Also, there's always
Yeah.
that internal pulse, and
Yeah.
let me ask you this: do you think that nowadays, because people listen to music that is so quantized, pop music and things like that, that sense of groove and being able to lay one instrument of the drum set back or move something ahead, that is disappeared, and that affects drummers that are up and coming from hearing so much, for so many things that are just quantized, so many records, pop records, they're all beat detected and put in time. And
Well, yeah, I think it has a lot to do with the individual musician, what they listen to, and the answer is yes, and then the answer is no. Like I mean, there's like phenomenal. Like I said, there's some phenomenal drummers out here, younger drummers like Spud and like I said with one guy I really failed to mention, which is Nate Woods, who played with a group called Knee Body. I mean, and you listen to him, his whole concept is way outdoors too,
yeah,
and I mean, I really really enjoy listening to him, to get ideas. But it all depends on like who's the musicians' listening habits. Like when I learned how to play drums, basically, by me listening to Elvin, at a very young age, it taught me how to hear polyrhythms. And also, I got to tell you this, and I'm quite sure you probably remember this. Do you remember a machine called the Trianone? Okay, there you go.
Dennis, I'm only 2 years younger than you. I looked it up, so
But a lot of people don't know anything about the Trianone.
yeah.
I say Trianone, and they go like, "What? What is that?" Well, see, my father brought me that machine. I think I was like 7 years old, and I sent him out to get a metronome. He comes back with this black box with all this. So I plugged the thing in, and then all I hear was just a bunch of clickety clack, clickety click. I unplugged it, wrapped it up, stuck it in the closet
Something's wrong with this.
for a long period of time,
Right.
and rediscovered the thing when I was like 13 or 14. But when I plugged it in and turned the thing on, all of a sudden I heard Elvin, because I've been listening to Elvin for a lot of years. Then I understood what the whole concept was about, the polyrhythms. And I mean, because the whole thing about polyrhythms is like if you have to hear it first. If you don't hear it first and you just go and listen to what he plays, it just sound like a bunch of mumbo jumbo. It just sound like somebody put some tennis shoes in a dryer or a couple of pair of tennis shoes in a dryer, and and that's what you hear. You don't understand any of it.
Do you know the record, the real McCoy Tyner record?
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
That to me is some of the greatest playing of all the people. Joe Henderson, McCoy. I think Ron Carter's playing bass, and Elvin, and the groove on the title track, Passion Dance. I mean, the whole record is amazing, but that particular, I always thought that drum sound too, the room mics, that is what inspired Led Zeppelin, things like that.
Yeah.
That those jazz players, like you were saying, hearing those room drums of Elvin's and just the intensity of it was what inspired rock actually at the time.
Well, that, and also Bernard Purdie. A lot of people don't understand. Like especially for the British musicians. I know for sure. Like Led Zeppelin, John Bonham was like he loved Bernard Purdie, and there was a song called it was an artist by the name of Diane Washington, and the song is called "Foolish Foolish." When you listen to that record, you can hear Led Zeppelin. You can hear the sound. And you can hear John Bonham's drum kit right out of that. So when I asked Purdy about it, Purdy go, "Oh yeah, blah 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 blah," and he was like kind of amazed that I even knew about it. A song called "Foolish Foolish." My mother, it was like she played that song, man, and Ian I, who was not really a serious drummer at that time, would like sit there and like was really amazed at the sound of that drum that came over those speakers. And the beats that he played.
Let me ask you this: when you're tuning your drums, you always tune your own drums, everything, right? And will you tune?
Oh yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about your tuning concept, or your, how you decide to tune for a song or for a,
If I'm doing a whole album, I tune for the style of the music, right? But it all depends on what style of music that I'm playing. If I'm playing jazz, then the drums got to be tuned higher, of course,
right,
and more open sounding. And that requires, whether you use coated heads, like ambassadors for Remos. Now for Evans,
coated ambassador for playing jazz.
Yeah,
like
coated ambassador.
You can tune higher.
And the drums are a lot open. There's no sound control on it anywhere, But I'm an Evans guy, and I use like G2s or G12s heads, and they're going to be coated or clear.
How do you decide on that? On whether you're going to use coated or clear?
It all depends. Now here lately, I've been playing a lot of funk fusion things, and it still relates to, but the whole concept still relates on a bebop sound because the drums are open. I don't use sound control that much, except for maybe I'll get into the floor tom, and then I may have to use like a moon gel on it or something, just to dry it up some or give it a tone.
Yeah.
Focus on the tone a little bit more. But like when I tune the drums, I normally tune the drums either in thirds or fourths.
Okay.
And I always start with the biggest drum, which is my floor tom, first, and go from the floor tom up to the highest drum. Or because sometimes I use I'll stop at a 12, and then sometimes I'll stop use the full kit, and you stop at a 10.
And why will you start with the floor tom? Just so you get that sound controlled and kind of where you want it, and then you just tune the rest to that, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, because sometimes, as I try to start from the high toms down, and then I get it tuned perfect to what I'm hearing at the time, and then I'll play. You play the track, or you listen to where the band is going, and go like, oh, well, the drums are tuned too high now, so now I got to start from the floor tom, get a big sound on that. But also, what helped me with all of that is I was since I'm a big Billy Cobham fan and Lenny White fan, these guys and Narada Michael Walden. If you go back and listen to their drum sounds were really amazing. And Lenny, especially when Lenny, came around with Return to Forever, and you listen to there we go. And you listen to Romantic Warrior.
Oh, yeah.
That record, man.
Yeah. Amazing.
The sound of that drum kit was really, really something. So, I had the difference between Lenny's drums and Billy's drums, where it was just pitches. There were higher pitches, and the drums were more open on Billy's kit. Lenny's drums were tuned more deeper, and sometimes they were like a little piece of tape here or there. But as I understood after talking to Lenny, he didn't, he tried to keep the drums wide open. The only thing that had any kind of muffling system in it was the bass drum.
Would you say that in the with the old school drummers, that most of them would keep the drums open because that was something out of jazz as well, that the higher tunings, the open drum sounds, that people would want to get that natural sound, use very little dampening.
Yeah.
And that was kind of that was just the concept at the time.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's just like Motown. When you listen to Motown's drums, or when you listen to Stax recordings. Well, let's take Motown, for instance. Like when you hear those great drum fills that the drummers were playing, and you listen to the sound of the drums, they were like bebop tuning. And that was all like just white-coated heads, white ambassador drum heads.
Well, nobody used to change their heads back then, right? I mean, really.
Yeah.
If you look at...
They didn't have to.
They didn't have to.
They didn't have to.
I look at old videos of bebop players back in the 40s and 50s and 60s, and you can tell they never changed their heads ever. You could tell because all the coating would be worn off, and they looked like they were 6, 8 years old, whoever, and they never would break a drum.
Yeah, they had such great hand control.
Yeah.
Like you look at like pictures of Max's old drum kits, and like you look at the snare drum, and it's like the head is like totally white, except for the center of the drum is like all worn out.
Yeah.
And it still have a great sound. I mean, I just did a tour with Victor Wooten and Bob Franceschini, and my drum tech we used that on this tour. He kept bugging me about like, man, you want to change the drum heads? I'm like, nah, leave them there. So I had the same drum heads from the beginning of the tour to the end, and they sounded great.
I read somewhere one time, I don't know if it's true, that Ringo with the Beatles never changed his heads during the entire Beatles career on any of his drum sets. So whatever he played in 62 and 70, they were the same heads.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. But Charlie Watts, he never he never changes his head.
Did they make him better than Dennis, or are they the same? I mean, are ambassador heads exactly the same as they were?
No. First of all, the material changed. Like you take an ambassador drum head from the 70s versus what they're using now. They're using different Mylar. And I'm not sure if it's better, because I don't use ambassadors. When I went to Evans, I just lost all interest in Remo drumheads for a lot of years.
I noticed that on some of my old drums, I've got some old Slingerlands, some old Leedys, old Ludwigs, and I pick up a new set of drums, and the rims are heavier on the new sets of drums than on the old sets of drums. Yeah. They were, I think they used 1.6 millimeters on the old ones and 2.3 on the new ones. But I noticed, so I went out and bought for a new drum kit that I had, a new Ludwig kit that I had. I bought some old 1.6 millimeter hoops and put it on, and it changed the sound so dramatically for the better too, having the lighter rims, that it really was surprising.
All that stuff plays, an effect on the sound of the drum. And that's why, like companies like Pearl, when they started getting into like, taking the tom mounts off the bass drum and taking the mounts off the shell of the toms, and started using their IMS systems and all that stuff. If you notice, like the guys who use racks, first of all, the first mistake that they make is like they put, like if they got 3 rack toms, their second rack tom is always in the center of the bass drum. And they're not even aware that they're doing it. They just saw somebody else do it, and they go like, oh, that's the way you set up a rack. Well, that's how you set your toms up on a rack. So that means that if you're playing, like for instance, like, if your bass drum, if you had your toms on the bass drum, well, first of all, the bottom rim of the tom tom is not sticking past the hoop of the bass drum, right? So therefore, the toms are pushed in more towards the front of the drum, which means that now you can get closer into the drum kit now versus like, using a rack. And you can also, I mean, you can move the rack any kind of way you want them, but when they took that mount system off that bass drum, people got used to having their tom toms hanging, the back end of the tom toms hanging way past the bass drum hoop. That means they got to sit further back from the bass drum. That means that your leg now is like angling outward, right? So now you're not getting enough power,
right, on the kick
to hit the kick.
Yeah.
Or enough control to hit the kick. So people don't stop to think about that. They go like, "Well, this feels different. How come I can't do what? How come I can't move my feet like the way you move your feet?" And I'm sitting there looking at them like, "Yeah, I don't know."
Which, of course, is another reason to use a 14-inch deep kick drum, right?
Right. But even when I use a 16-inch, I still keep in mind that, when I set my rack up, I always look, when the rack is going across the bass drum, I always stand up and look down, like straight down to the bass drum and make sure that the bar of the rack is even to the tension casings on the bass drum, the very beginning of the front bass drum tension casings.
So then exact that it's going to be right, pretty close.
It's going to be right.
Yeah.
And also, by me, like understanding exactly where it's like, as if I had my toms on the bass drum, mounted on the bass drum, there's nowhere in the world I can have a tom-tom in the middle of the bass drum. So therefore, I still have my flow, because a lot of people don't understand there's a flow to your drum kit. And, like the older styles, that's why they had your snare drum wherever it was sitting, and right in front of it, was your first tom-tom. And it's sitting, like straight, like going from here, straight, just moving your arms straight up. And then from there, moving your arms to the right, there's your second rack tom.
Yep.
Coming down straight from that is your first floor tom. There's a flow to that. But if you got your rack tom in the middle of the bass drum, now your 10 is further in, not sitting exactly where it's supposed to be, and it throws off the whole flow and the where the body is supposed to move and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Throws it off.
Are there any favorite recordings that you've done? Do you ever go back and listen to your old records?
Sometimes I do.
What would be a favorite record that you've played on that you like your own playing on?
I like my playing on Bill Evans' Super Band record. It was called the Super Band, and that was on that recording. It was Victor Bailey, Chuck Loeb,
That's right.
Mitch Foreman, I believe it was.
I think
was on that record.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mitch was on that record, along with Bill and myself, and of course Scofield.
Yeah.
I love those. And I got tons of bootleg, or board tapes of that band, and some of that stuff I go back and listen to. I'm like, holy Christ, what I think we were on drugs or something, even though we didn't do any drugs. And like, like I said, we got to do this. We're going to be playing in New York or somewhere in May, sometime in May, and we got to figure out like how to match that concept of what we were doing back then. The live performances were like a lot faster than the records, and a lot more energy was into it. So, and now that we're a little older, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be a lot of body aches.
No way. Come on.
No, I'm only kidding. But yeah, I mean, when I listen to some of those recordings, there's, it's just like anything else. You get used to, certain thing, and all of a sudden you want to make it more interesting, and then you play it a little faster, and just to get some energy into it. and the end result is the crowd goes nuts. Like how you pull these things off. Well, I think that's one of the things that I think that's one of the reasons why I play music is because my mom was a background singer for Motown before I was born, and she got out of it when my sister was born, or sometime after my sister was born. My sister is a year younger than me, and but she put a band together, or should I say, when I was an embryo, in the womb, it was all this music was always played at my house. Like I mean, my mom was a big fan of music, and she played everything. Like rock, a little bit of rock, a lot of R&B, a lot of soul, some jazz. So when I came into the world, you know, being a kid and really not connected to anything until I saw her one day. They were rehearsing at my grandmother's house. It was either at my grandmother's house or sometimes in my mother's apartment. They would rehearse, and that was the only thing that kept me still. And believe it or not, it's funny. I still remember the drum kit. I can remember the color of the drum kit. I remember the guy's name, and I'm like 3 years old. The guy's name was Booney. The drum kit was a Gretsch drum kit, and it was a Champagne Sparkle kit, right? And but it was the only thing that kept me still. And when they finished rehearsing, then I would pick up knives and forks and start banging on furniture. My father would, trash me later. Thank God he was a upholsterer, and he would fix the furniture up, and then they brought me a drum kit when I was like 3.5 years old, a toy drum kit, just to see, you know, how far I would get with it. And I, kept the drum kit for about a year, I believe. And then my one of the kids in the neighborhood trashed the drum kit. I think they fell on it or something and crushed the bass drum or something because it was like 10 or something. And and I was heartbroken. And then they went out and brought me a kit, a custom, somewhat of a custom kit at this place called Ted's Music Store down on Center Street here in Baltimore. The store is still there, but you know, Mr. Ted's died a long time ago. A lot of people don't know that. I didn't do much auditioning for bands or things like that. I was always blessed um, to get in groups without auditions. And the first story was, when I was like 13 or 14 years old, there was a place called the James Brown Mo in downtown here in Baltimore. Um, and it was owned by James Brown. He used to own, radio stations and motor inns and things like that, through the country. I just happened to be playing in a group that was like a James Brown cover band, so to speak. And I'm in the bathroom, using the bathroom. I came out to wash my hands. There's a guy standing next to me, and he's singing some lyrics, but he's like mumbling lyrics. He's not really pronouncing the lyrics, per se, and he's picking out his hair. And I'm like, who's this idiot? And I look in the mirror and I look down, like, holy shit, it's James Brown. Mr. Brown is standing next to me. And I'm like, washing my hands, and I'm trying not to look now. And I'm trying to think of something to say to him. So I finally figured out something to say, and I'm like, Mr. Brown, my name is, Dennis Chambers. I'm a musician working here at your establishment here, and be glad to, if you come in and, give us a listen. We're playing some of your music. And he never looked at me. He just still he was picking out his hair. Yeah, kid, whatever you say. So, make a long story short, I leave the bathroom. I run to the club and told the band, like, you're not gonna believe who I just saw. I just saw James Brown in the he's here. I just saw him in the bathroom. They didn't believe me. So now we go on stage and we're playing, and the door opens. The front door opens, or some door opens, and you can see a crowd of people come in. It's kind of dark in the club. Crowd of people come in, and then they go sit in the like a dark corner and listen. So during the break, some big dude comes over, and he goes like, "Hey drummer, Mr. Brown wants to talk to you." Like, I'm looking at the band, and the band's mouth like what? Like, he is here. So anyway, I go over and talk to Mr. Brown, and he's like, yeah, kid, yeah, you sound great. You got a nice backbeat. What do you think about playing with Mr. Brown? And I'm like, yeah, Mr. Brown, yeah, we'd love to play with you. Blah 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 blah. And then all of a sudden I remembered, my mother's not gonna let me go, because I was still in school, and so I explained to him, like, if you get past my mom with this, sure, I'll be glad to go. So I gave him the phone number, and he took the thing, and he's looking at it, he's talking to me, and he's looking at the thing, and then he puts the information in his pocket. And he asked me what time we were going back. I'm like, well, we'll go back now if you want us to go back. It's your place. He says, just take another, 5, and go back when you go back. So I went back over to the band, and the band is like all freaking out, like, what did he say? Oh my God, did you do this? Did you do that? I'm like, nah, I was just in awe. He wants me to play in the band, and they was like, what? He wants you to play drums in his band? Like, you're lying. It can't be so. So, make a long story short, a week go by. Every day I come home from school. Mom, did Mr. Brown? No phone calls. 2 weeks go by, no calls. And I'm like, Chris, he's not gonna call. I knew he wasn't gonna call. Well, all of a sudden, the phone rings, and this is this the Chambers residence? I'm like, yeah. Is it Dennis Chambers? I'm like, yeah, this is Dennis Chambers. He says, hold on a second. And then Mr. Brown get on the phone. Hey, how you doing? He called me Shorty. Hey, Shorty, how you doing? I'm like, Mr. Brown, how you doing? I didn't think you were gonna call. He said, oh yeah, I was gonna call you. It just took a minute, and had to do do a lot of things, this, that, blah 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 blah. And like, great to hear from you. It's like, is your mom home? I'm like, yeah, my mom's here. I put mom on the phone, and my mother, she's sitting there like rolling her eyes, like, this is not him. So when she started naming some names, she was telling him about some of the people that she knew by being in Motown. He goes, oh yeah, no, so and so and so, and blah 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 blah. And then he's singing something, and she's singing on the phone with him for a minute, as I recall. And then it started, then she realized it was really him. And then, he started asking her questions about me playing in the band, and she asked, well, the only way I would let him go if you get him a tutor. And at the time, he was an advocate of education. He would always have this saying, don't be a fool, stay in school, right? But he wouldn't offer a tutor for me to go out on tour with him. Now, I'm 13 or 14 years old, but he wouldn't get me a tutor. So you can imagine the effect that had on me not going like the on tour with Mr. Brown when I was 13 or 14.
Oh, man.
And the effect that had on my beliefs on what school was all about. I hated school at that point, But then I found out later about playing with, like P-Funk or Parliament Funkadelic, and run across, Bootsy Collins, Maceo Parker, Fred Wesley, and Pee-wee, and those guys, and learning, what kind of guy Mr. Brown was at that time. And thank my lucky stars that my mom said no.
Yeah.
And because the guy he marched to a beat of a different drummer for sure. He was doing a lot of things that if people don't know, I won't mention that he was into back at that time, and that was that story. But the crazy story was, somewhere in working with John Scofield, we see Miles Davis in London at the airport, right? And John's got, he used to wear this like long, knee length coat, and I think it was tweed, as I remember, or something. And in the pocket, he had a tape recorder of Blue Matter, right? So now he's sitting next to Miles, and Miles is just sitting there waiting for his flight, to board his flight, and he's doing a sketch. And Miles was like, he's another kind of guy who marched to a different beat of drummers. And, he's just sitting there, with his dark shades on, chewing his gum, sketching. He may have looked at John a few times, but I'm not even sure. I can't remember for sure. And so John is playing them, Blue Matter and, So You Say and all these pieces. And Miles just I remember Miles looked at him and he goes, "Who's the drummer?" And John, like, looking around, goes like, "That's him over there." So Miles, he took his glasses, his shades, and went like this. And he's looking at me. And all of a sudden, his lips curled up. He looked like the Grinch that stole Christmas. Like the corner of his lips, like, curled up. And he's, like, looking at me, smiling with that devilish smile. And he pushes his glasses back up on his head with his finger and nodded. And I nodded back, and all of a sudden, like a month or two go by, I get a phone call. Now, mind you, I had just got home from one of those Scofield tours. Somebody gave me a videotape of Miles Davis with the Gil Evans Orchestra, right? I ordered a pizza. I got the tape in. I'm sitting eating the pizza. And the tape that I had still had, it had time code on it. So it was clear as a bell.
Yeah.
It was like like a copy off the original copy. I'm sitting there looking at it. The phone rings. Is this the Chambers residence? Yeah, this is Chambers residence. May I speak to Dennis Chambers, please? This is Dennis Chambers. Hold on a second. No, he says, Dennis Chambers? I'm like, yeah, this is he. Hold on a second. So this guy picks up the phone. So, hi, I'm Peter Sugars, Miles Davis's manager, and Miles wants to talk to you. I'm like, okay, yeah, sure. I'm thinking, it's Bill Evans, the saxophone player, because he always played jokes on the phone, or one of my friends, who happened to hear, what I was listening to, and then they're going to play a joke on me, so I'm not going with it. And all of a sudden, hey, when you going to join my band? But he said it with a few insult words, which I can't repeat. When you going to join my band? I'm like, yeah, who is this? This is Miles. Miles who? Miles Davis, you MF. I'm like, Bill, I know it's you, Bill. Quit playing, man. What do you want? This ain't no, you believe in Bill? This is Miles. Vince, I know it's you. I'm gonna count to 10.
No.
If you don't tell me who it is, I'm hanging up. He's talking. I'm 1, 2. I got up to 10. Hung up. Click up. Ring. Phone rings again. I pick up the phone. Is this Dennis Chambers? I'm like, yeah. Hold on. Peter gets on the phone. Dennis, why'd you hang up on Miles Davis? Because I know there ain't no, MF and Miles Davis. I know this is Bill. Well, I know this is Vince, and start naming all my buddies. No, Dennis, listen to me. This is Peter Sugar's office. That was Miles Davis you just hung up on.
Oh, my God.
I'm like, yeah, whatever.
Oh, no.
So Miles get on the phone. Hey, you black MF, why'd you hang up on me? I'm like, because I know it's not Miles Davis. This is Bill.
Oh,
Or, go through the names. And he's going on like, telling me, blah 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 blah. I'm like, look, this time I'm gonna count if you don't tell me who this is, I'm counting to three or whatever, and I'm hanging up. UMF, if you hang up on me, one, God, two. I swear, if you hang up, click up, hang up the phone.
No, you did not.
Ring. This is Dennis Chambers. This is Dennis Chambers. Hold on. Now, instead of Peter taking the phone this time, Miles, got it. Hey, you black MF, write this number down. So I wrote the number down, and I'm listening to the tone of the call, and it sounded like it was long distance. And it says like, call me right back. You just call me right back. I'm like, okay. So I hung up the phone. I sit to eat pizza for a minute, like looking at the tape, thinking about I'm gonna kill Vince and Bill and everybody else I could think of who probably would have made that call. And then all of a sudden I'm like, now what if that was Miles? So I'm looking at the number. So what I got to lose? I'll just call the number and see. So I called the number up. Peter Sugar's office. This is Dennis Chambers. Oh yeah, we're expecting you. Hold on. And Peter answers the phone like, I told you this is Peter Sugar's, and that was really Miles on the phone. I'm like, yeah, is he still there? He goes, yeah, he's here. So now he says, hold on. Now Miles he's getting back at me a little bit. He's got me like waiting. And I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe this. I can't, I'm like freaking out. And then he answers the phone. Now you block MF? Now you believe me? And he's calling me all kind of names. And meanwhile, I never met him yet.
Right,
He's like insulting me like to the fullest high degree. Like, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, blah, 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 blah. And he's like, man, when are you going to join my band? I'm like, well, a friend of mine and his nephew was in the band. He's the drummer at the time, and I knew what that gig meant to him, and I never would join. I always wanted to play with Miles, and I figured, maybe later I would play with him, and it never happened. And we'd be traveling in the same circles, and I would see him at some festivals, and he always like if he see me standing on the side of the stage, he'd pull the glasses down, he'd look at me, with the trumpet, like close to his face, and then he'd point to the drummer like that could have been me, you know. And I'm sitting there going, oh, yeah, I know, I goofed, At least like 40 minutes, at least it seemed like, and he was telling me all these things about Coltrane and uh, Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie and all these stories about these guys, like and also traveling with Tony, Ron, and Herbie and Wayne. That was like one of the greatest things he, that he really enjoyed playing with those guys. You know. Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah. You know. And I even got like in my possession, I got some studio recordings of them, like rehearsing, like the Miles Smiles record.
Wow.
Where they rehearsing Freedom Jazz Dance, you can hear, where the whole triplet of like when Tony comes up playing the triplets on the snare drum. That was basically Miles telling them, Freedom Jazz Dance.
Wow, that's amazing.
You know, damn.
That is amazing. Well, listen, I really appreciate you doing this. This is fantastic. That Miles story has got to be one of the funniest stories I've ever heard, I have to say. The end of the interview was cut off just when I was thanking Dennis for being with us today. So once again, I'd like to extend my thanks to him for doing this show. He was incredibly hilarious and just what a pleasure to speak with. Anyways, please subscribe here to my Everything Music YouTube channel. And thank you for watching. I'm Rick Beato.